Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leader Talks. I'm Wildermuth, and with me is Katherine Olson. And Katherine, you have on your website the Director of Leadership and Service Delivery.
Yeah.
So you have those listed. But you also talk about wholehearted leadership. So I wanted to start out with how do you define wholehearted leadership?
I love the concept of bringing your whole self authentically to the work that you do every day. And I think that the best leaders that I've ever worked with and encountered have this sense of being whole and complete as individuals and as human beings. They don't park their frailty or weakness or sense of humor at the door. They really come to every experience with a sense of how can I learn, how can I contribute, how can I help? And so when I talk about wholehearted leadership, that's really where I'm thinking of coming from.
Okay. When you also talk in here about working in a charitable organization, is that true? Okay. Do you find there's what differences do you find between the corporate world and the charitable world in leadership?
There are really fun differences, I think, and that's one of the reasons why I've spent a lot of my career in nonprofit. And what I find that I love so much, I think probably aligns well with the sense of wholehearted leadership that I was just speaking to, is people live in the world of nonprofit and do work there because of the care that they have for the people around them. And so when we come into spaces of learning and growth and development in nonprofit and in charitable organizations, there's a purpose behind it that's more than a financial bottom line. And there's a sense of wanting to help the world be a better place. There's a sense of kindness and compassion that lives within organizations that are nonprofit in nature. And so in the corporate world, I think there's a lot of that as well. I don't want to say that the corporate world is an unfeeling, inhuman place. I don't think that it is.
As many people do.
I know. And so I want to make that distinction because I don't know that that's true. I think that it gets a bad rap sometimes. I find especially in small and mid-sized businesses, corporations, there is a ton of heart that's there, and there's a lot of great leaders and a lot of people invested. But when we're talking about charitable organizations, the greatest strength is sometimes the greatest challenge. So you have people who come with lots of love and lots of heart and this do-gooder spirit, and not necessarily a lot of business background, not necessarily a lot of strategic planning background, or how do we measure results? How do we measure impact? That's just a really tough question to answer. And so the leadership within nonprofit organizations has a lot to do with helping people do good business for good in the world. And that's where I love to kind of hang out and help people.
Oh, that's very interesting. Very interesting. Do you believe that there are some basic strengths then that every or any leader should have?
Absolutely. An ability to be a great listener, I think, is one of the most important attributes that any leader can bring to the table. It's really fun to hear yourself talk sometimes. And in this world of social media, that's sort of what we're commanded to do, is like put your voice out there and be heard and make a statement. And in that same vein, it's really important to listen. It's really important to hear what are the needs of the community, what are the needs of the people that we're leading, and are we really hearing that, or are we stuck in our own space of this is what I think we need to do, and just making decisions without any good data to back up those decisions. So definitely listening. Also a way of understanding accountability and what that means. So as we work with again, charitable organizations, or even those smaller corporations, they're doing great work, and it's all about doing work, and we're measuring activity instead of impact. So what does accountability really mean in those spaces? Are we being true to the donor dollars that are coming our way? Are we fulfilling on the promises that we've made? Are we being accountable to the measures that we've set for ourselves? And really having a lot of integrity about that and being willing to say, no, we're not hitting that marker. How can we do something differently? So listening and accountability, and then I love authenticity, and we've talked about that already, but being willing to come with your whole self and be able to present as a complete person.
Do you, I don't usually like to ask yes, no questions, but then you can elaborate on it. But do you think then that so much concentration as organizations get very large, and we are here in Iowa, and we're getting in Microsoft, and we're getting Apple, and they're giving these giant tax deductions or tax abatements and things. And I just wonder, have large corporations lost that aspect of charity work, even though they give money to many of the organizations around? They still don't pay sometimes much taxes, and they're depending upon people to be their upcoming employees. So therefore they're cutting taxes, cutting the legs out from underneath many of the schools and things of that nature. So do you think that they've lost sight of this, and should, how can you as a charitable person bring that back to them?
I love that question.
It's a long one.
It is. I would say I hope that corporations haven't lost sight of that. Corporations are some of our biggest funders in the nonprofit space, and there's certainly relationships that we cultivate very consciously. And we love working with large corporations. So locally here in Minnesota, and certainly nationally, there's a lot of great Fortune 500 companies that do amazing partnerships with nonprofits in the area. And I think that comes from a sense of it feels good to do good. It feels good to help. And it's also good for business. It's really good for business. It helps when organizations, large corporations can say, yeah, we're helping in our community. We're planting our seeds around us. And so we see a lot of that working really well. I think that what I'd love to see more of is, without commenting too much on our national tax policy, being willing to look at how then do we also include kind of the three-legged stool of nonprofit, corporation, and government working together to do good in the community. How do we bring all of those infrastructures together to maximize what we can do together? Because there's great policy that's out there, and there's policy that's out there that's pretty good, and we can continue to improve upon it. And I think it's really by working together across sectors that we can come up with even better answers.
So what kind of core values do you think that organizations should have, whether they be profit or nonprofit?
I would hope that all organizations that are doing work in the world have core values that center on an awareness of their participation in the world, an awareness of what's the community around me. What, again, doing good listening, what are the needs around us? What's not working? Being able to ask the question of ourselves, as leaders in organizations, of one another, what's not working and why? And it gets really easy to shout out a soundbite that says, that's not working, it's a terrible idea. And what I challenge organizations that I work with and the organization that I'm in right now is to say, it's not enough to say it's not working. If I'm really a leader, if I'm really showing up as a leader, I'm also coming to the table with, here's some thoughts about what we might try. And working collaboratively, getting engaged in dialogue and debate, and saying, what's our strategy? What's our resources? How do we make these connections so that we can do something better? Because simply sitting around and saying it's not working is never going to help anybody.
How do you figure? We have a person who on the website asked a question about fear. How do you see fear invading that kind of space of going out and asking people for assistance?
It's a big motivator, right? It's part of our programming, and it's a survival strategy, and sometimes it goes into overdrive. And I think that there's a space for fear to be serving us if we stay in curiosity about it. If I say, wow, I'm really nervous about making that request, Why am I nervous? Is it because I don't feel prepared? Is it because I don't feel like it's a valid request? Is it the fact that I'm lacking confidence? Sometimes those are really simple answers. I have a lot of compassion for leaders, particularly leaders in the middle, the ones that I call the medium cheddar. They're not the big cheese, they're the medium cheddar.
I love that. That's great.
And I have a lot of compassion for that space, because these are people who are emerging, who are trying really hard to, listen to the vision at the top and implement the vision on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And inside of that, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to be a great performer and to really prove that you know what you're doing, so you can get to the next level, that sort of thing. And so translating the messages is a real challenge. And so being able to find ways to do that more and more effectively is some of the work that I love to do.
How do you approach those people when you go into training? How do you approach them, and do they see you? Do they take you? I don't want to say this really insulting or anything, but do they take you seriously because you're coming from an organization that's a charitable organization, not from a corporate bottom line? So, So what's the feeling that you have when you walk in, and how do you approach these people?
Well, I think I often get tagged as sort of a touchy-feely do-gooder, right? And so I don't take that as insulting at all. I think it's understandable, because in some ways I am a touchy-feely do-gooder, and I love people and I love doing good in the world, and that's just how I'm made. What I find when I'm working with organizations that really want to do better is they value the people inside of their walls. And so when they're doing that, they're creating space for exciting opportunities for growth and development, and looking at, are our employees engaged? What are they doing well? What are they not doing well? And how can we help them get better? And so sometimes coming in with, a sense of caring and compassion and concern and humanity and authenticity can be sort of a nice, delightful surprise for organizations, for corporations in particular, because we're talking about something that you don't go to your regular 9-to-5 day job and talk about. We're talking about things like, are you bringing your best to work? What are your core values? How are those being put to use? And having fun conversations that are also meaningful and bring people together, draw bridges between people within an organization. So it ends up being a really fun experience usually.
Good. Sounds interesting for sure. When you also look at diversity within an organization, you have teams that are made up, and usually when the more diversity, the more conflict takes place. Is that also seen within the charitable organizations as well, or is the mission so precise that you don't have the diversity because they are locked into these core values or beliefs in the system?
I would love to say, that it's easier in nonprofits, and that people do have the same motivators, and the mission really, hits us all in the same place. But the reality is we're very diverse. We're diverse in background, we're diverse in language, we're diverse in values, and the organizations that tend to do better. So if you're familiar with the Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner, one of the things that they look at is, right, like we're all familiar with that. One of the things they look at is, who's more effective, homogeneous teams or diverse teams? And I think that what they found pretty conclusively was homogeneous teams sort of, get there faster. I'm having a lot of emotion. I'm very excited.
I told you before, it's a casual situation. I know I'm dressed in a tie and everything, but my wife would shoot me if I'm not. The first couple interviews that I had, I was in just a regular kind of shirt, and my wife said, "You can't do that anymore." So, and I shouldn't be doing this because she does some things with it, but I don't care. Anyway, go ahead.
Well,
it's very informal.
So what Kouzes and Posner found about homogeneous teams versus diverse teams is that homogeneous teams can get to an ending point faster. Diverse teams can get to a better ending point. And so these groups that are able to sort of function within their diversity and put various strengths to work, really end up with a better answer. And I was just doing a training actually for a young women's mentorship group, and a young woman there really talked about that well. She said, I appreciate you saying that, because in a recent experience, I was with a bunch of achievers and activators, and we really focused on finding the right answer to this problem, and we came up with one, and I was ready to activate on it. And then some other people came in and questioned what we were about to do and really challenged us. And she said it took almost a year to get through all of these challenges. Ultimately, we came out with a better product, and I'm really glad that we did, because it has a stronger solution. There was fewer mistakes along the way. And so I hope that we really see diversity, value it, and create space for the conflict that diversity often creates. You know, it doesn't create conflict, but it certainly makes it more challenging sometimes to communicate well and to find pathways that we're all comfortable with. And so activating diversity from a standpoint of how can we use that to our advantage, I think is a great challenge.
I agree with that greatly. I mean, that's a very good point. And I guess that's a point that we can end on. I think our time is coming up. Is there anything we usually talk about, any books or anything that you have, or anything that you want to plug? So at the end of this interview, so what would you like to plug from your side?
Yeah, I am always interested in offering coaching and consulting to nonprofits and, like I said, small to mid-sized organizations. And so I welcome anyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Katherine Olson, MED, for Masters in Education, because there's a lot of Katherine Olsons in the world. And to reach out to me to come on in and do some training around strategic planning, strengths-based leadership and development, team development, those kinds of opportunities.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Katherine. I appreciate it greatly.
You too, Mel.
And I hope that you become a great success, huge success.
Thank you. I feel successful already. We've made it this far. So,
yeah.
Good things are in store for the rest of the week.
Well, we have a very good group of people, too, that'll stay in touch, I'm sure. And I hope I can stay in touch with you as well. So take care, and we'll talk with you later at some other point in time, maybe.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.